Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. This is the 27B Grow Your Own Staff Grant Round 2 Applications webinar. Just a couple of notes before I introduce myself and some of our MD colleagues that's joining me. Today's webinar will be recorded. We're going to take the recording and put it onto a link up in the MD YouTube channel for everyone to see if they weren't able to make it. So also please keep your microphones muted. We will have a Q&A session a little later. Best way to get us questions during the webinar you might have is through chat. And I've got a couple of helpers today that are going to be wrangling up those questions. And I will also say if we don't quite get to every question, that's okay. We'll make sure we'll get back to you, or we'll add it to our evolving FAQ document on our site. So anyway, this is again the 27B Grow Your Own Staff Grant Round 2 applications. By now you've probably heard, hey, there's a Round 2. I better check this out. That's right. I'm your host today. My name is Phil Chase. I'm a contractor here with the MDE. I'm doing some grant facilitation and coordination work. You might have corresponded with Jenny Dickens. She is on vacation right now, but she will be coming back soon. And joining us also from our team is our RRU manager, Dante Watson. Dante, do you want to unmute and say hello real quick?
Yes, welcome everyone. So excited for the opportunity to be here with you, and excited to share information about the Round 2 application. So welcome.
All right. Also joining us from the MD ranch, we have Wendy Warmuth. Wendy, do you want to unmute and say hello? Wendy's a contractor with our team as well. I think Wendy's shy. That's okay. You might have seen Wendy's name for some of the questions you might have.
Sorry, Phil.
Oh, there she is. Yeah.
Yeah. For some reason, the participants just were lost, so I apologize. Yes, I'm also a contractor for MDE, and I have a background in finance, and so I might be able to help with some of those questions.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us today, Wendy. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. FYI, before we even start, we get a lot of questions about sharing the slides. We've opted to record this as a video because we think that's a little bit easier way for folks to access our information. So there won't be any sharing of the slides, but we will be having a video that will be uploaded to the MD YouTube account, and just keep your inboxes peeled for the link to that. So you will have an ability to access the information on the back end. Okay, so let's make sure this works. Okay, so in today's session, here's where I'm going to give you a little overview of today's session. We have an FAQ segment. The FAQs are kind of organized because we have been noticing that we've been getting some really great questions from Round 1 awardees, and we think, well, the Round 2 grantees will want to know the same things. So we're going to give you a kind of walkthrough of an introduction. Even though some of you might be Round 1 awardees, you might be interested in making a Round 2 application. Heck, we didn't know who we'd get, and we're really happy that all of you are here. So we're going to go through some sort of like I guess some contextual introduction information first, and then we're going to talk about who can apply for the Round 2 grants. And then after that, we're going to kind of walk you through some application basics. That should take us about 20 minutes or so, I think, is what we've got budgeted. The next section should take about 10 minutes, and we'd like to give you some information about what to know before you apply. We've got some new supporting resources available. That's on our website, as well as a document that helps people that are wishing to apply understand the differences between Round 1 and Round 2. Again, we may have some folks here today that were Round 1 grantees and now want to know the best way to make a Round 2 application. We might have also had some districts that were not awarded Round 1 and have found out about Round 2. Well, we'd like them to know about the differences between Round 1 and Round 2 as well. We have reserved about 15 minutes for Q&A. Dante and Wendy are going to help round up the questions that we've got. I've got a little bit of something about my mic not being clear. I'm hoping that's a little bit better. I've got a special mic today just to make sure you can hear me all right. Hoping that's clear. At any rate, so we are going to have a Q&A segment, and then we'll take as many as we can get during today's session. And then as a special bonus, we're going to be walking through the round 2 application screens. I'm going to actually show you the GEMS-MARS screens section by section. So at the end of today's session and at the end of today's recorded videos, you'll know exactly everything you need to know to be a successful applicant for our round 2 27B Grow Your Own grants. What's not in today's session? What's not in today's session is the following list. We actually do administer many different grants that are considered under the Grow Your Own family or the Future Michigan Educator family, if you will. And they're all kind of branded. You can kind of see the common branding there off to the side of the screen. But we're not going to be covering those. We will take questions for those through our mde-pme@michigan.gov account, which I'll show you later. Don't worry about if you're taking notes. Don't worry, I'll get to that. But we thought that during the presentation, the participants might want to still have bookmarked some of our resources that we're going to be talking about throughout the presentation. So you'll see a QR code pop up here and there. Feel free to go to that while we're talking, or take down that link. And whenever there's a QR code, I'll stay on the screen for a couple more seconds so you can get it. And again, if you don't get it right away, there will be a video made, so you won't miss anything. But just so everyone's clear, we're not going to be covering these programs. This is only for the 27B Grow Your Own grant program, and it's for the round 2 applications, just so everyone is in the right place. Okay, with that clear, let's go on to our FAQ segment. Again, this is going to take about 20 minutes. We organized it in a series of frequently asked questions because we figured that would give us a nice contextual base, but also would answer some of the questions we see coming in. And again, some of the questions are from round 1 grantees. Some of them are from hopefuls for the round 2. Either way, we figure it's all good information, so let's get started. The first question that sometimes we get is just in general, what is this? So we figured, you know what? Never hurts to go ahead and review, right? We're teachers after all, and we're educators, so it never hurts to review. We still get some basic 101 questions about, the Grow Your Own program in general. So just so everybody knows, it's a competitive grant. It provides state and federal funds. Being competitive, I should say, means that nothing's guaranteed. It's not a pot of money that is automatically going to be divided to districts. You do have to make an application. Competitive also means that the application is scored. It's reviewed and scored. But what it's for is it's providing these funds so that we can better meet staffing needs at districts and buildings. And those needs might be current needs that the district has data on, or they've already been discussing, they already see among their staff, or predicted needs, things that we'll need in the fall because, hey, districts are in touch with their learners and the needs of their learners and the different groupings and classes they want to offer in different buildings. So the target for the program would be, or the candidate, I should say, target or candidate would be current employees of the district. It pays for initial teacher certification that those staff members wish to gain, or you can also use the grant to pay for additional endorsements on an existing certificate, as long as those match the areas of staffing needs. And a little bit later, I'm going to show you a section in the application that talks about how to clearly define your district's needs for staffing. So again, this grant program is aimed at reimbursing a district or reimbursing the costs of its employees to gain initial teacher certification or to add those endorsements onto their existing certification. The grant program also includes partnerships as a necessary component with our educator preparation providers, or EPPs. Again, we're going to say a little bit more of that as the presentation goes along. But our partnerships with our EPPs are an important component because The grant mechanisms need to know that the designated staff members have a program that's been approved that they can go to. Next question we sometimes get is, well, wait a minute. Round one, I thought there was only one round. Why 2 rounds? Well, it's a good question. What happened here was in May 2023, we had about 80 school districts that received funds, but we had 160 applications received. What that meant is we only were able to give out about 40% of the funds. We have about $92 million still available for round 2. Now, what we're saying, you'll see this in the next slide again, is you just because you've applied in round 1 doesn't mean you can't make another round. You can't make a round two application for a different cohort of teachers. But we are really, really excited about and interested in getting this money into the hands of Michigan school districts. This grant is for training and addressing staff needs, and we absolutely need that money to go to districts. So, what happened the first round? Fortunately, we saw many districts disqualified from their applications, or they scored low due to just some common errors. If you've been looking at our MDE memos or press releases recently, we actually have a memo that addresses some of the common errors that round 1 applicants made. And we're really hoping that with some adjustments, and of course we're here to help you with some adjustments, you can make a successful round 2 application. In fact, again, I'll mention a little later in the webinar, but we've made some specific improvements to our GEMS Mars screens to assist, again, the most successful applications being made. Next, who can apply? So you've heard me say it a couple of times now. I'm just going to repeat. All ISDs, LEAs, and PSAs are eligible applicants, regardless of their past application status. We're welcoming applications from districts that may have missed the deadline or never knew, or districts that applied in round 1, want to try again. And we're also welcoming districts who are round 1 awardees who already had an award, but who have identified additional staffing needs and would like to make a second round application. So again, the whole point is let's get this money to Michigan districts. As far as the timeline for applications, a lot of folks are asking us about that. We actually have the round 2 application that already opened on July 12th. Some of you may have seen emails going to your inboxes about that. That application window is 8 weeks long, and it closes on September 6th. We did, just to let you know a little bit of our background, I've included the next bullet point to tell you about some of our considerations for the 8-week window. We wanted the maximum number of applications with a maximum amount of support from us, but we knew we couldn't wait overly long. We have to get this money to districts. So we kind of got a happy medium with the timeliness of awards, but also the amount of time you need to make applications. We're confident that this will help all districts be successful with their applications and put in the most high quality data they possibly can. The last 2 bullets are not guarantees. They're more aspirational, but we think this is going to work out so that application scoring is going to happen around September. We really hope to have those award announcements in mid-November because, again, districts are going to be already making plans to use that money after they apply, which we hope they do. So that's a word about the timeline. Now, exactly how will these things work? We get a few questions about the mechanisms. And some of the questions, as Wendy and I can tell you, we're getting some about the financial mechanisms. Now, as a footnote, we're not going to go into a ton of financial information today. We're really trying to give you the overview of the round 2 applications today. But I can say that we're going to be putting out some new guidance, some additional guidance for the financial mechanisms very soon. We're going to do that in the format of a video, kind of like this one. But we're also going to be putting out some FAQs as well as this because we've gotten some new answers for folks. And we know that people are interested in how they want to make sure that the dollars and cents all make sense. So just to remind everybody how this is going to work, the round two is all federal funds. We had some state funds that we gave out in round one. Round two is all federal funds. And that means that because it's federal funds, you can probably guess that it requires good oversight policies from both MD and you as grantees, as potential grantees. You also have to have really good policies overseeing the money. It's kind of a given. And I'd say that about state funds too. I don't mean to say that just about federal, but you can probably tell we're going to be having, this is grant money, and it's a lot of grant money. There's going to be some oversight that we're going to guide you for, as well as we're going to be working with other organizations to do. So the reimbursement funds can be paid to individuals or directly to partnering EPPs. I won't go into too much detail about that now, but we have had some sort of sub questions about that. And again, a really good resource I'm going to remind you of is our FAQ page on our grant website, which is going to be a QR code and a link that'll come up a little bit later in today's presentation. But there are a couple questions about what's better, paying to individuals or paying to partner EPPs. We've got a couple of things about that, but you can pay them either to individuals or to partner EPPs. And you can use the awards you get for expenditures incurred as far back as March 3, 2021. So what we're doing right now is we're setting up our Nexus systems to handle a lot of this financial transaction data and functionality. We think Nexus is a really good system because it's familiar to districts. It's going to allow us to be able to track budgets and expenditures. We know that Nexus already hooks into the financial systems and the banks that districts use. But we also are going to rely on Nexus for periodic reporting. Again, we'll have many more details about the reporting and how Nexus will be set up. Not in today's webinar, but in a different video we're putting in. So if you've got some questions that are more budget related, we'll take them today. But please be sure that if we don't get into today, we will address them elsewhere. But we're very happy that we're going to be able. We're hoping to use the Nexus system for all of our financial transactions. So that's kind of how it'll work. And again, if you're a round one grantee, you kind of know some of this, but not all of it, maybe, or you need a good review. Round two applicants are definitely going to want to know how these kind of things work. So the next question we usually get, if we talk about like costs and expenditures and reimbursements, is, well, what can the grants pay for? So we have a list here of allowable costs. This list is also on the GEMS Marge screen, just to be perfectly transparent. It's going to be up there, and we're going to remind you about this. It's going to be actually, this list is also going to be in our monitoring and guidance document. But just to give everyone sort of like a thumbnail sketch right now, the grant can pay for all the coursework tuition that your designated staff member incurs on their way to that initial endorsement or their initial certification or their initial endorsement. It'll also be usable for all the fees associated with coursework. As we know, there sometimes can be fees at different colleges and universities for various things. You can use the grant money for those fees. The cost of our MTTCs actually, also interestingly, you can actually defray the cost to the participant when they take that MTTC as the last step toward their endorsement. You can even use the grant money for books for the coursework and texts, and even to get your employee to and from the locations for coursework. And then the last bullet point has gotten a little bit of interest of late. You can also use the grant funds for the cost of substitute employees, like substitute teachers, but they have to be ones that are necessary to support that candidate in completing coursework. Again, that's a really great piece of guidance we're going to be adding on to some of our other places. We won't go into great detail right now today, but yes, you can actually use the grant funds to pay for substitute teachers to let your other candidates who are participating in the program actually be successful in participating in the program. Again, we want this to support the candidate's experience toward getting that initial certification or their desired endorsements. And as you can see at the bottom of that slide, the main idea is to not just support them, but create a no-cost pathway for each candidate toward those towards so you're able to address your staffing needs. And we actually had a couple of questions about what a no-cost pathway was. Well, here's what we've been saying to people. It's a pathway that contemplates all possible costs for a candidate and then plans so that the final cost, the end cost of that person, however it works, is zero. So at some point, you'll probably have some questions here and there as your employees encounter unique situations and ones that aren't covered in the scope of this webinar. That's okay. Again, we're here to help. MDE-PME@michigan.gov is your resource, is your email resource for us, our team. We monitor that daily and we will get to your questions. Another thing I want to not glaze over too much is that the grants can pay for the Explore program to a maximum of 10% of the total budget you request in your application. Now, that Explore program, I did say I wasn't going to cover it in slide 2, but I have to mention it real quick. It's a great program which gets students from grades 6 to 12 interested in becoming teachers. You know, as a personal note, I'll throw in real quick. I did a little bit of work for the Teacher Appreciation Month this past May, and we had some videos that came in from a school district where the students were, as I found out later, they were participating in the Explore program. So I actually saw some really great messages of teacher appreciation from the students who were in this program. That was very exciting to see. So the Explore programs can have more details we can provide to you on our website. Again, I can't really go into them too much in the scope of this webinar, but please consider that 10% of your total requested budget can be used for Explore programs, and that's a really great way to get some of your students thinking about the teaching profession. Again, we're looking at the operative word here is future Michigan educators, future proud Michigan educators. So we're thinking about the future. We did this slide I included because I wanted to also do a little bit of due diligence to some of the other questions that are coming in. Again, great questions, very important. And as we find out the answers, or as we come up with language around the answers, we want to share them out to everybody possible. So I'm going to leave it here on the video and the webinar, but we also have some of these on our FAQ site. We got some questions about districts who had said, listen, we budgeted for some costs in round 1, but like we still weren't sure about everything we possibly needed. There's like an other, like how do we know, right? And we don't want to ask for anything that's then going to get us disqualified, or that later someone's going to say, oh, I'm sorry, that wasn't allowed. We didn't know, right? And that's very important. So we figured round 2 applicants were going to want to hear this too. So that's why I included it. The main idea here is to understand your district's current and projected staffing needs. You really have to have a great idea, not just a basic idea, but a great idea of what your staffing needs are and they're going to be. Because if nothing else, your Section A response in the application you make is going to ask you to be very detailed. The scoring committee is going to look for that kind of detail. They're going to look for data and evidence upon which you've made claims about your staffing needs. It's not that we don't believe you. We just want to make sure that you know you've done your own research within your district to know what you need. Because we're going to fund you appropriately, obviously. So to the extent you can, you have to understand like how that no-cost pathway is going to play out for each candidate you have in mind for the grant. And one of the pieces of feedback that we had received earlier in this process was that a district had done a lot of work partnering with their EPPs to understand not just the current cost of tuition, but they're going to project the tuition costs. And they asked us, can we budget accordingly? We said, sure, because that's a great idea. It's great that you looked ahead and didn't just take, like, for example, somebody's schedule of payments that they had seen that day. You know, costs can change. So you have to kind of anticipate the best you can. There's also a there's also a row or a set of blanks in your budget that's gonna be allowed for other expenses. So the other expenses is another piece of of guidance that we're going to be putting out. Again, there's a lot to say about that. I can't capture it all in the scope of this webinar, but you can budget for other expenses. You just have to remember you have to have a clear justification as to why it supports the no-cost pathway for your candidates. And we have some examples in our round one monitoring guidance, and we have some examples on our GEMS Mars screens, which you'll see at the end of this webinar, of things, of examples of expenses that would be other but ancillary and probably not covered, and examples of other that are necessary and probably will be covered. I hate using the word probably, but for right now, I can't give you a list of A, B, C, X, Y, Z. I just can't. But we can help you figure it out by some of the guidance we're putting out soon. So just be clear that you can budget for other expenses that are not otherwise listed on your budget, but in your application, you have to be very clear about the justifications for those. Again, the more information you give the application, the better. Now, in the meantime, we've also had some questions about flexibilities that have been allowed for reallocations. When this team says reallocation, what we mean is that you might have had a person designated for your grant who then moves away, moves out of state, leaves teaching. Unfortunately, that sometimes happens, or maybe transfers to a different district, and they're no longer able to be designated for. They're no longer able to be designated for the grant monies. We do allow, and we actually encourage, I should say, is the right word I'm looking for, general flexibility of reallocations. As a district, you've asked for X amount of money. There are some things that you just don't have control over. And it could be shifting staffing needs based on enrollment. It could be unexpected employment changes. It could be you have a whole bunch of new like ESL students that enroll. You might have some grants you just don't know about at the time you apply or at the time you were granted the award. So yes, the answer is yes, you do have flexibility to reallocate to different staff. And you there's a couple of conditions. One of them is the flexibility is obviously can't take you past your grant amount, obviously. So what we've decided to do is show you this now, give you some hope that there are flexibilities for reallocations because we're getting some questions in. The round one grantees have been asking. The round two applicants are going to want to know when they make an application. Yes, I have to carefully think about my candidates. And as you'll see during the walkthrough of the GEMS Mars screens, we're going to ask you for the process of selecting the candidate. But please know that we do have a fail-safe for unexpected things that might happen within your candidate selection pool. We'll also be putting out some more guidance about this in our guidance and monitoring document. Round one, folks already got a version of this. We're going to be updating it soon. When round two folks apply and then they are awarded, they're going to have a similar document. So again, even though this is about the round two applications, we figured we're going to throw this in because both round one and round two folks will want to know. So if you look at the last bullet point there, this is something that I find that we're saying to districts a lot. You saw in a previous slide that monitoring and having a good control, having good oversight of your grant funds is very important. Well, it's so important that you really need to have well-developed policies for candidate selection and the what-ifs. So I want to remind everybody, a key to this on your side for the monitoring of your grant dollars is make sure you have written policies to the extent you can that describe what decisions you've made for the grant allocation, for the reimbursements, and then some of the contingency plans. It's a really good practice for districts to have. Okay, so that's a lot so far. We got a few more here. And again, we're getting some questions in and about candidates. So let me just go ahead and cover this a little bit. We did get a few questions about, I've got a candidate who I think would be good for the grant, but I'm not sure because reason. And the reason might be because they're a third party staff person or they're only like intermittent, for example. So this is kind of what we can say about candidates. This is really important, though, for the round 2 applicants who are going to be asked, as I mentioned just a minute ago, they're going to be asked for to describe their candidates, who they think their candidates are, as well as the process of selecting the candidates. One difference between round 1 and round 2 is that we have made that section, we streamlined it a bit with not so many open text questions. Even still, we have to know very clearly how you're going to select your candidates, who you've got in mind, right? So in the legislation, the phrase we have is support staff. And so the guidance that the MD has put out to clarify is it's any employed individual working in a school. Do they have to be full-time? No. Do they have to be direct employees? No. They can be employed by a third party. That means some of your substitute teachers who want to get their certification and become full teachers, they now have a pathway, a no-cost pathway, but they have a pathway, right? One thing, though, that's in law, and it's in the newly signed budget as well as the previous version of this, it's in law, is that you cannot be concurrently receiving, a candidate can't be receiving reimbursements from 27B at the same time that they're participating in the Future Educators Fellowship or the Future Educator Stipend. And also what's new is that they cannot be receiving reimbursements under 27B and also be receiving funding under 27P, which is the Marquette Algebra Visa and its consortium. So we have another FAQ on our website that explains that in more detail than even this slide does. But just be sure of those two caveats. So a little bit more about candidate selection based on some of the questions we've got in and some of the things we know round 2 applicants are going to want to know. As you probably heard me mention in a previous slide, one of the important things for you to do as a district is determine your current or projected staffing needs. Think about the students you have in mind. How is my need for staffing? How does that reflect what my students need, what my learners need to make them successful? And then a good way to go about doing it is you can group candidates into cohorts or groups, because in the application, we're going to ask you to select multiple candidates, multiple cohorts of candidates, because we know you might have some ways to classify them in some ways. You're going to have a generally flexible field as to how to define them, but the definition process we want to see as part of your selection process. Can you have a cohort of 1? Sure, you can. But we have some larger districts that have reported having, a couple of cohorts of 8 or 10. This is great because we know that they're kind of, they're in control, or they have a good idea of their candidates. So look for the cohort or grouping. What's the word I'm looking for? Look for the cohort or grouping function on our GEMS Mars screen. They can have any level of education. They can be going for initial or additional certification. They can be going for additional endorsements. That's all fine. That's included because they don't already have to be teachers, for example. In fact, many of them might be support staff, paraprofessionals, again, bus drivers. It could be substitute teachers. Anybody who's got a dream of being a teacher, I mean, think about that. But they have to agree to attend those partner EPPs. Again, the partnership with EPPs is a very important component of the grant. You'll also see in the application, and if you already saw it in round 1, if you're a round 1 person, but in the round 2 application, you will see assurances that the district pledges to hire that candidate at the end of the program. And then the candidates pledge to work for as many years as they were in the program. There has to be some commitment to the outcomes of the grant. And again, as I said before, they can't concurrently be receiving the Michigan Future Educators Fellowship or the stipend. So we had a little bit of questions coming in about EPPs. And I'm going to leave this screen up for a bit because there's a couple of QR codes there. But what we're directing folks to do is look at 29 approved educator preparation providers in Michigan. And that list is at something we call Pro Prep, which is that first link there. And in case you missed that link, the application itself will also provide a drop down with the list. We got a question in just recently about someone who's readying their application, but who said, do I have to get the partnership agreements first? The answer is yes. You really want to have those partnership agreements because the application is going to ask you to upload them. We don't have a template right now, but the application, the scope of the partnerships, we're going to actually get to in the next slide, so you can get an idea of what to ask your partner EPP. And we also can answer individual questions that come into the mde-pme@michigan.gov email. But we would also like to tell you that you can work with out-of-state providers. Now, the FA, because we knew there's going to be a lot of questions about out-of-state providers, we actually included an FAQ, a special FAQ section for out-of-state providers at the QR link you see there. Again, I'm going to direct you again to the FAQ section for that. The out-of-state providers have certain requirements, and that again, I can't go into too much detail now. I just can only remind you to look at the FAQs. But it's the district's responsibility to make sure that the out-of-state provider can fulfill those requirements because that is absolutely a requirement of the overall grant. And districts can work with multiple EPPs. You can actually, I've seen applications with 3, 4, 7 different partnering EPPs, and that's done to give their candidates a choice of where to go. Or some EPPs can offer some programs others can't. So one component of your application, as you start to develop, is to be in contact with your partner EPPs, making sure they can do the kinds of things. They can provide the kinds of programs you want to address your staffing needs, and the kinds of services they can provide to your candidates. Very important aspect of this is the partner EPPs. Okay, moving right along. This next slide is about those expectations. This list of expectations is actually in our monitoring and our guidance and monitoring document. So we wouldn't expect you all just to quickly write it down for notes right now. We will have some places where you can refer to this again. And I won't read them off. I'm just going to let them be on the screen for a moment. This slide actually is from our round 1 webinar. It's the same information to the round 2 people's. Again, it's going to be available in FAQ format. Plus, this is a great opportunity for me to remind everybody to also go to the grant website that we have. You'll see that advertised in anything from memos to press releases to emails to the monitoring document itself. The grant website is a wonderful resource to find all kinds of things, including resources for working with EPPs. I did have a district earlier, I think it was this morning, who asked about, is it okay to start contacting EPPs for application? Is it okay? I said, absolutely. It's very important you start those conversations now because, again, they're the ones that you're going to be relying on to provide your candidates with exactly what they need to become successful teachers, either, again, their initial certification or an additional endorsement in your buildings. This is how we grow our own people, really. So I'm going to leave it on for just about 60 more seconds as we have a couple of questions coming in to the chat. And again, we will have a Q&A section in a few minutes. I know it's about 1:41, so this is now taking about twice as long as we all thought, but that's the way it goes, right? This next part, we should go ahead. This should be a little more brief. Remember, if you can't stay on for the entire time, that's okay. We're going to be making a video from this webinar. That's why we're recording it. At any rate, I'm going to move along, and we're going to go to the before you apply section. This section here talks about the resources we have on our website, and we started with kind of excited about it. Sorry, it sounds a little nerdy, but we're kind of excited about it. We have the round 2 application template in Word, downloadable right now from the Grow Your Own Staff Grant website. Once again, we have the Word document. What this is it's a Word version of all of the screens you're going to see at the end of today's webinar when I walk you through the GEMS Mars application site. So very important you download this first, use it, because you can draft your responses in the document and then copy paste them into GEMS Mars when you're ready to make your application, but then you can save this for future reference. We've had a few round 1 school districts asking us for their GEMS Mars screens. They wanted to go back and remember what they said in their application. We can do that for you at any time, not a problem. We can do that to the authorized content. But even better, if you use this Word template, you can save everything that you uploaded at the time of application, and then you can use this to start generating your policies after you're awarded. If and when you're awarded, you can use this to start generating some of your policies for oversight of the grant. Again, we can't say more about this. Download this very important document. So again, it gives you a written walkthrough of all sections of the round 2 application. It's right now available. I've said enough about it. I'm going to go on to the next slide. So about that website, I've actually got the QR code right there. Our links are sometimes long, although if you go to michigan.gov/FPME, I believe it'll also take you to the same place, a little shorter. But we'll make sure you have the website in front of you at all times. But take a minute there and go to that link. I'm going to leave that up there for a couple of minutes as I walk you through what's on this website. So the website has updates and information about the grant itself. We're going to be using it to publicize timelines and deadlines for various things. So for example, earlier on in today's webinar, I told you that the application window opened on July 12th and it's closing on September 6th. You'll see that information in a bulleted list on the website. We're going to be updating it a lot, though, with the kinds of guidance documents I just showed you in the previous screen. Anything that's downloadable in Word, anything that you can click on and use to make your life easier as either an applicant or as a awardee. We're going to be using that website. And then we're also quite proud of the FAQs. The FAQs is kind of an evolving process. That is to say, we update it very frequently to reflect new questions and new information that's come in. So you might want to put it in your favorites and then check back every once in a while. After you've applied and then been awarded. This goes for round 1 awardees too. Definitely keep it in your favorites because we have updated information there all the time. And we also have a section on the EPP resources. So this will underscore some of the things that I said a few slides ago about working with EPPs. And we also have a section about how to apply. And then we made sure that the glossary of terms, a while ago, we had some definitions that we wanted to publicize, which you'll see on the GEMS Mars screens. We also have that on the website. So once again, the Future Proud Michigan Educator GYO, Grow Your Own School Staff Grant website is a very important resource to keep in your favorites. So about that FAQ site, there's a button that links directly to it. I decided to add a slide with the QR code, again, just in case people are like, "Ooh, good, I want to get that right away." You have it there in front of you. But the FAQ, again, is a living document. We actually updated it relatively recently, I think within the last couple of weeks. So round 1, folks, check back there because I think we might have some new answers for you. And we're posting answers that come in from districts all the time. So again, it's good for round 1 grantees, but it's also good for round 2 applicants because if I was a round 2 applicant, I'm going to want to read through all those FAQs and be very ready for my application the time I make it. So we're going to also include FAQs that come in today if we possibly can. And again, if we don't answer them now, even if we do, we'll put them on that site. So we're kind of happy about that. I'm going to leave that QR code up for another 30 seconds, and then I'm going to go on to the next slide. And that next slide is about the additional resources on top of the ones that I told you about just now. The additional resources we're going to have is we're going to be planning for some office hours. We're doing this because we've had some requests from really great questions have come in. But sometimes districts have a question that's so complex, they just say, can you meet with us? And we say, sure. I mean, some of us are extroverts after all. We like to meet people. But besides that, we thought if we do some at office hours, that's a better way to organize some of our time. And then districts can have a predictable time. After all, we're all very busy people, and sometimes finding a time we can all be on a call is a little difficult. But again, we're here to help you. We're here to support you. We want to be able to provide office hours so that you can come with your questions that you believe are very specific. We're going to prioritize round 2 application questions because we know there's an 8-week window for that. Doesn't mean we don't want to hear from round 1 awardees. We certainly do. But we know that the next few weeks it's going to be busy for districts to get those applications together. And we bet they're going to have a ton of questions. So we're going to prioritize round 2. And if you haven't applied before, you get a special priority as well too. Because remember, we want to get as many districts. We want to get them as successful as possible to make their application. So the special update, the special budget update video, I put that here as well, just to give you an announcement. We did have some technical problems with Zoom on our back last week Tuesday. And I'm hoping that there aren't too many technical problems with Zoom here. I'm hoping you can hear me okay, but I hope the video comes out all right. We're not Zoom experts, but we try hard, but we do apologize that we were not able to do that webinar. So instead, we've got a video that we're going to be recording very soon, and you'll see a link for that video. That video, by the way, is going to unveil, or I guess it's going to explain an Excel spreadsheet tool that we're going to be rolling out to round 1 grantees for the revised budget. So all your questions about that are going to be solved pretty soon. Just kind of stay tuned for that. For round 2 people, boy, again, if I was a round 2 applicant, I'm still going to want to watch that video because that'll help me understand how to set up my budget in a very efficient way. So again, stay tuned because we've got some great resources coming out for you, office hours, and the budget update video. Okay, so at this point, I now have a few slides on the differences between round 1 and round 2 applications. I know that I've got some people waiting for Q&A, so I'm going to give this about 10 minutes. I'm going to give this about 5 minutes because I tell you what, I'll make you a deal. If you stay on, I'll be walking through those GEMS Mars screens and I'll be mentioning this too. But still, I couldn't help but to tell you that to help out the round 1 folks that might want to apply again, plus the round 2 applicants. They're going to want to know exactly what's in these application screens. And although I'll show them to you in a minute, I still want to just point out a couple of things. So I'll go through this quick and then we'll have our Q&A session. The round 2 applications include a preamble section that gives you some of those glossary terms, but it also talks about some of those common application errors. Again, we want to do everything we possibly can to make you successful as applicants. We are no longer doing separate sections for 504. That was the alternate route application. This is only for 27B, so we were able to streamline it a bit. Although you will see alternate route providers listed in section B. Section B is the different EPP partners you can work with. So just to underscore it one more time, and then I swear I'll move on. Section A is looking for more specific information from you about what your statements of need are for your staffing. So again, we also give some examples of data points that would be really great for our community to see to help underscore your statement of need. Again, we're really looking for just dynamite applications. We want to see dynamite explanations of your statement of need We want to see that districts understand their staffing needs very well. Section B is EPP partnerships. It actually explains some of those parameters for out-of-state partnerships. You saw that slide I showed a minute ago with that list of requirements. We also have that there. So again, between the website and the actual GEMS Mars screens, a district should have everything it needs to know to be very successful in its round 2 application. We're really hoping that you see that. And then we have sort of a dynamic table. You can actually fill in a dynamic number of EPP partnerships, and then the table will expand. We're kind of proud of that. Candidate C talks about candidate selection, and we've actually streamlined this section from 5 narratives to 2, and we've made the other 3 into checkboxes or assurance checkboxes. So we hope that you'll see a streamlined effort there. But again, we want districts to focus on explaining their process of candidate selection very clearly. We also, unfortunately, had some round 1 applicants that didn't do it, that really weren't very clear with how they were going to select candidates, and that's something that we got some feedback from our committee about. So we're definitely looking for some really good Section C information from this. Section D is your anticipated cohorts. I had mentioned before, you can do multiple groups of cohorts, think of them in terms of groups of cohorts. And then it also asks to match the endorsement sought to each group or cohort, or whether or not they're going for initial certification or not. So Section D does kind of a better job of maybe organizing your own cohort information for you. And the cool thing is, if you use that Word template, again, you can actually use the table and you can add rows, and then you can just copy paste each cell into there. It should be nice and easy. Section E talks about the Explore program add-on. It's now a dynamic section. Once again, if you want to use up to 10% of your requested amount to fund an Explore program, we love to see it, and that is an option. You won't get counted off points or anything if you decide not to go with Explore. It is optional. It's just so people know. There was a question about that. But we do love to see that Explore program happening because we know it works. We know that, young people, they love becoming teachers, helps with our pipeline. Section F is our budget. Again, we're going to be focusing on the budget in a separate video, but we do have the corrected codes up now, and it does clarify examples of allowable costs and other necessary costs. So one thing it clarifies, for example, is that it's not allowed to change your, you can't change your grant amount, and you can't claim indirect costs, for example. I think there's a little bit in the chat right now about that. Oh yeah, Wendy's handling that right now. Thank you, Wendy. So we might get a question here and there from districts about that, but we think that the GEMS Mars screens do a pretty good job of giving you all the information you need at the time you're applying. But again, a good strategy is ask us questions or book office hours before you apply to make sure you have the best application possible. Finally, that Section G is really the same as the first round, but it includes the assurance for the Marquette RISA consortium. So you'll see a list of assurances. One of them, for example, is that you pledge to hire the candidate after the program. Another one is that that the candidate will serve for as much time. The candidate cohort will serve for as much time as they're in the program. So you'll see those assurances in there, but those are very necessary because, after all, those are hard-coded in the legislation. All right, so I apologize for going a little quick there, but now it's time for Q&A. I think I've got at least one question Q&A. And I'm going to read this off. Again, if we can't get to it, we can draw questions. We're going to try, but if we can't, we'll follow up with you. The question was, in round 1, the alternate route providers were sectioned off into the Section 504 grant. Correct. I noticed that they're all lumped into 27B in the round 2 grant applications. Is this correct? If so, is there a statutory limit to alternate route or provider related grants to be funded? I'm not sure about the statutory limit, but it is correct that you're seeing alternate routes listed along with EPP partners with whom you can work, even though the Section 504 grant was yet something separate than this. So I think we need to get back to you about that. It says anonymous participant, but if you want to email the MDE-PME@michigan.gov email account with your name, we can get back to you personally. But that statutory limit, I think we'll have to look into. It might be in legislation, it may not. Sorry for that non-answer. Are there any other QAs coming in? I just saw that one, but I'm going to give it about 1:56 right now, so I'm going to give it a couple more minutes. And I will say that people who are contemplating questions right now, again, if we don't get to it, we'll save the chat for later. But what I'll do is I will advance the slide to that. That's that MDE-PME@michigan.gov email that I've been talking about all the way through the presentation. And here you are with a shorter URL for our website. So let's see here. We got another question in Q&A.
Yep. Phil, there's another question in the chat. It says,
Yep.
are all grade levels eligible for this program, or is it 6th grade and higher? And I'm
Leo, I
assuming-
think you mean the Explore program. If you mean the Explore program, grade levels 6 through 12 are eligible for Explore. I'm hoping you meant the Explore program.
That's what I'm assuming also.
Yeah. Dante, as you're looking at that, I'm going to look at the chat here, see if we ever got any more here. Oh, this is a good one. We have another question in the chat, which was, are there any requirements of the staff that our district is including when applying for the grant? Are they required to already have a degree? No, they are not required to already have a degree. That's a really good question, because they can get reimbursements for a degree granting program. That is possible. Good question. Okay, we have another question here. One of our partner districts seemed to think that in round 2, they had to have candidates identified. Is that true? I know in round 1, they didn't have to apply for specific candidates. Rather, they applied for needs and positions. Thanks. If you by identified, you mean by name? No, they do not need to identify by name. But this is why we ask in the application, which you're going to see in a moment if you want to stay on the webinar. We ask for groups or cohorts. You should at least know the groups or cohorts that you intend to provide reimbursements to, but you do not need to have their actual names. That's a great question. All right, I'm going to wait for just one more minute. It is on the verge of 2 o'clock. I know we're all busy people. Let me actually advance this slide here one more time. We can't help a shameless plug to follow us on social media. So if you follow #ProudMIEducator, or you go to Twitter or Facebook @MichiganEducator, we'd love to have comments and hellos there. And I'm going to leave this screen up here for a couple of minutes. If you don't mind giving us your feedback, we have a feedback form. We do believe in continuous improvement. After all, if we didn't believe in continuous improvement, there wouldn't be a round 2 application, right? I mean, think about that. But we love to have your comments and your feedback, so we know how we can make your experience better, how we can serve districts more. I'm going to leave that on, and I got a couple more things in the chat I see coming in. Let's see here. In round 1, we just applied for the support staff GYO. Is this still available for round 2? Round 2 is the support staff GYO. It actually broke it up into 2 rounds. Your round, they're the same one. It's the 27B, we call it 27B, but that's the support staff GYO. It's the same one. So, to answer your question, please do apply for round 2, even if you are a round 1 awardee, because in the meantime, you might have identified a new cohort of teachers that are also additional staffing needs. Heck, if I was the superintendent, I'd want to go, sure. I also we applied for X, Y, or Z, but now we can apply for these folks too. So anyone can apply, any ISD, LEA, or PSA, regardless of past application status. So, but this is the same grant.